Hi, I'm RC Jim, and this is our second video on the repair of the wing of this SBD Dauntless dive bomber. We've got it up to this stage right now. We want to show you what we're doing with the dive brakes in here, and we'll be setting up the servos in a different way than what it was done originally, and a few other bits and pieces in getting this wing finalized. But we're getting close, going really well. So, watch. Okay, if I'm going to utilize these flaps the way they are, of course, got some nice kinks to get sorted out. But if I was to glue those together and get rid of the kinks and get it straight, minor miracle, but let's say I did that. Okay, what I would normally do is I would have an angle on this and I would hinge it at the top. And I'd let there either be a gap on the bottom or maybe have a little flap going over the gap. But if I'm to utilize it like this, I need to hinge them on the bottom, and then when the flaps go down, it open up a gap on the top, which I could either just allow to be a gap, or I could again have a little flap of covering to cover up the gap. Just not sure what it's going to do to the airflow. Now I'd let them down like that. So I'll be mounting a servo up here with a control arm on that. Okay, well, let's keep it simple. We'll stick to our original hinges, so the first thing we'll try to do is see if we can get them straight and glued together. One of the problems with how they had this set up before with the servos in there, the servos were mounted on these things, okay? And so to do any adjustments, you had to get this loose, do your adjustments, and put it in place. Totally crazy. Servos should have been installed in there to where they're fixed in place. Then you could make your adjustments for the dive flaps and stuff. And I guess that'd be a possibility, wouldn't it, to stick to dive flaps and just change that setup to where you can be more accurate. But you got that one arm trying to do both of them. It really needs two servos in there. And then you're just adding a lot of weight. And yeah, I think if we just make them into normal flaps, we can still dive as much as we like. Okay, so with this, we will leave the control things on there. We're going to have to clamp them together, so I need a piece of timber. I guess I'll use epoxy, huh? Looks to me like I can clamp it without having to mess around with the water. If I mess around with the water, then I've got to spray it, straighten it, and then dry it. I'm working on getting my clamping jig set up. Got the baking paper down there. Problem with the baking paper is it's very slippery. Of course, I got the baking paper on there because I'm going to do some gluing and whatever. And then if I'm going to use epoxy, then I'm going to have to put it on there and then get everything set up. And it's very slippery. So what I'm thinking, I put a little arrow here that's right straight over top of the middle of this. And I'm thinking I'll put a couple of screws there that'll clamp down on those screws, because otherwise the clamp will slide off of this thing. I'll set it up to where I can see the edge of it and get it all lined up. And boy, that's going to be a challenge. I guess I could put a nail on each side to keep it side to side, and maybe a nail to put it up against. I guess we'll do that. Kind of similar to our drilling template, only we're using nails to position this thing. Whatever nail I put on the end can't stick up because it has to clamp down on this. The ones here can, because they can locate that as well. Okay, so let's do it that way. And then I think I can apply all of the epoxy, put it together, put it up against the nails. This goes down against those nails. Isn't this exciting, figuring out things as we go? Too bad I can't do these things live and have you on a chat or something making suggestions, because I'm sure you guys have some great ideas as well. But what I decided to do, I'm going to clamp a scale on here to make sure I got these nails lined up. I thought about just drawing a line, but then I thought, well, can't get any more accurate than just simply pounding them in right next to a steel scale. Okay, so getting it started. I'm going to end up lopping off the heads off of these. Okay, well, that one's wonky. Getting them straight. I'll lop the heads off without popping myself in the eyeball. My eyeballs have enough problems. Trying to be careful also not to pinch my thumb in the cutters. Okay, now the height. I guess this is the critical thing right here, that these are all straight, and as far as the clamp on top, not that big of a deal if it's a tiny bit off one way or the other. Okay, then we want one down here someplace. This on here like that. And the bottom one is a tiny bit shorter than the top one. So much for manufacturing tolerances. Okay, now we want our supports along there. Roughly in those positions. Well, we're ready now to glue it up. Got a nice warm day today, so this ought to cure reasonably quickly. So we always want to make sure we get it good mixed up. Okay, now let's get applying it. I'll try not to put too much right around the nails, in that I don't really want them glued on. I'm sure we can get them off if they do get glued on. Okay, I think that'll do it. So we now try to get this in place directly on top. Okay, that's fitted in there fine. Now I put this guy on top of that, and our clamps on top of that. Okay, check that everything has stayed in alignment. Having glued our flaps, two pieces together, we've removed the clamps. We got the thing here, and it's now firmly glued to our nails. So we'll see if we can coax those apart. I don't think it'll take too much. Originally I was concerned about this, and then I thought, it'll be easy enough to get them off. There we go. Okay. So a little bit of sanding on those spots. Beautiful, nice and straight, just what we want. And that will do a great job. Very solid now. Nothing like what they were before. Nothing at all flimsy about that. When they're up, they'll be right in line. When they go down, we'll have a little bit of extra drag on the top from that gap in there. But that's all right. We want the extra drag when we got them down. Okay, so this should be all set. Well, I don't know if it'll be set for the next one or not. Okay, here's our next two pieces. And I guess it's just equal and opposite. So yeah, looks like it's going to fit in there perfect. Okay, so that's looking very good. So what we've done here, we've got the nails in place, lopped off the heads off the nails so that it's just straight going up. We've made sure that they're vertical. We got the greaseless paper on the bottom there, got this in a position where we can clamp it. We'll then mix up some epoxy, stir it up good. I'm looking at the reflection just to make sure I got epoxy on all of the spots where we want it. Okay, it's looking pretty good. Okay, get that all the way down in place. This one on top. Okay, get this on here. Down. Okay. Just looking here at the wing that wasn't broken, I see some gaps in here. I see a bit of a crack between the glue and the thing there. On the back, there's quite a large area that doesn't have any glue right up to the edge. And of course, through normal positive G's, that's got a lot of stress on it. Of course, it's still got the joiner in place in there, but I think I'm going to just add some glue into this, similar to what I did on this other side, and just try to improve that a little bit. Well, here's our wing, and it only needs a few other little things. Obviously, we'll put the servos in place for the ailerons. We need to install the flaps and then work out a mounting point in here for the flap servo. I think we'll run it through the back, similar to how the dive flaps were set up. So we'll do that. Only need a little bit of sanding on these areas where we added the glue in there, and a little bit of paint. So that's pretty good. I've repaired this little bit where it was split there. So that's all looking good. We need to get the covers back over here and everything. Servo in for the dive brakes, so we will have one thing of just dive brakes. And I suppose that might actually act as a bit of a flap as well. Yeah, so then the other side with the flaps and aileron. And so that, the wing will be done. There'll be all the servos there. For the rest of it, got a little bit of painting to still work on. Still working on trying to get the colors just right. But apart from that, it's already got the servos in. They're already hooked up. So it's just a matter of putting a receiver in, and I think, oh yeah, get the motor in, and ESC, and then that'll be all set to go as well. So we're looking now at getting our flaps installed. We got the dive brakes glued together to just make a single flap out of it. We've attached the control rod onto it so that we can have that in place. Awfully hard to get onto this after you get it in place. I've got the pins started into the hinges, and I just used a file to knock off any sharp little bits. Sometimes they tend to want to catch when they go in. So I filed off the sharp little bits, and so we get it lined up, and then we'll use a screwdriver to push them in. So one. Okay, that's in place. Okay, so that's our flap. And that'll certainly, if we want to slow it down, if we take it that far, that'll certainly slow it down. Okay, it looks like it's hitting. When it comes up where these hinges are on the other side, it's hitting on those because it's not attached to them. So I need to remove the what remains of the hinges there to allow that to go up all the way. And so I'm just using a nice sharp hobby knife blade to just simply cut off the part of the hinges that are sticking out. Okay, and now they'll come up all the way. With the landing gear door covers, we've used a clear glue. I've used this Bob Smith Industries craft glue, foam cure. Yeah, it seems to work okay. Definitely want something clear in case a little bit of it gets out, so it's not noticeable. And then as far as clamping it down in place, I use this tape, and I've stuck it down here first, and I pulled it really tight over to the other side. And then I've kept looking for places where there's movement if you push down on it. And if there is movement, then I added another piece in there. So that should clamp down in that nicely. With this one flap here, two of the hinges were loose. One had come out when I was taking them loose, and the other one was just sitting in there. And it's interfering a little bit with the aileron when you get, you know, it partly way done. So, yeah, they got a great big gap here and nothing there. If it's right in the middle, then the aileron works fine. But if the flap is down, then it's a problem. So anyway, I'll just have to do a bit of sanding in there just to make sure that they stay totally clear of each other. Okay, we've got a problem with our flap and aileron here. Binds up when the flap is down. It's okay when the flap is neutral, but down it's binding in there. So I'm going to use sandpaper in there, but I think I want to hold that to where it stays put. Let me just try this. Okay. Okay, so flap can go all the way down. Aileron is totally free in all situations. Flap is totally free in all situations. So we're now good. Well, change of plan. I don't know if you can see that little piece of plastic there, but that was the control horn on the back of the other flap. You know, this thing pushes on the little control horn under there. Well, this was crooked, and I was just pulling it a little bit sideways, figuring there's plenty of flex in it, and the next thing, the thing snapped off. So, those are specialty sort of things inside there. I can't replace that. Well, not easily anyway. So, it means forget my fancy little things that I made for the servos. Yeah, that was kind of cool, wasn't it? You know, I had this little thing all set up to mount inside here, to have the servo all the way enclosed and have the control rod come up there and all. That would have been great, but it'll be even simpler. I'll just simply cut a hole into the panel. This is the panel that goes up there. So I cut a hole in the panel. This will actually go in from the inside into that hole with just a bit of it sticking out like so, and put a control horn on the outside like normal, and everything will be fine. With regard to installing the servo in there, first off I had to cut off the supports that were under there to support the servo underneath, because they would be interfering. There's no sense having an extra weight in there. But keep in mind that with this flap hinging along this axis here, that the control ought to be perpendicular to that. And I'm figuring the control horn will be someplace around the middle of this solid section here. So right about here is where I want my the center of my servo. I'm looking for my pencil. So right in the center of this area is where I want to have my servo. So I've got this sort of sitting in that little thing there. So that's where I want the center of my servo. So I'm just going to put a line up here. That line is actually where the control arm is going to be. So it actually needs to be where the control arm is here, so the servo will be offset from there. Having said that, I then think about what's going to happen on the other side. On this side over here, the servo needs to be operating the same way, because these are not ailerons. These need to go together, and both servos, you know, one is in reverse and one standard. They're both the same. So they need to both operate in the same way. And fortunately, this plane originally was set up that way. Where this blank spot is positioned is where the actuator was underneath there with a little control arm inside. And on this one, it's positioned farther out than what it is on that one. So these two panels here are positioned exactly in the same place, reference to the center line. But the place to attach the control arm is different. So that gives me extra room to be able to mount that. And I have plenty of room to mount this, have both servos oriented in the same way, so that if they have a Y connector, a Y harness connecting them, that they both operate together in the same direction, and that's going to work out fine. In determining where to place this, I'll just assume that I'm, say, at the second to the last hole there, and so from the center line, that's over about 10 millimeters. So I will offset my center line from the line where we want the control to operate. I'll offset the center line of the servo 10 millimeters over from that one. And then it's about 12.5 or so wide, ½ inch roughly. So then I can go 6 either side of that line. And that'll give me the width that I want for the hole for the servo. While we're going over these little setup tricks, one other thing that I should let you know about, which is very handy, is the good old drafting technique, where if you have a triangle and you've got a straight edge, this could be anything, but I'm not wanting to harm the plane, so I'm using this bit of plywood here. So I get my triangle on this line that I want to stay parallel with. So I'm lining up this edge with that line. I've got the triangle right up against this piece of plywood. I hold the plywood steady, and then I can bring the triangle back to the little mark that I made for the servo. Draw a line there. Slide it out a little bit farther to the other side of where I want the servo hole to be, to there. And then if I want to have the square ends for the servo, I can use this side of the triangle. This is a 45 triangle. Actually, any of them would work. And then we just need to get the length, which I think is 25 if I remember right. Okay, so it's going to be right about there if I can get the triangle to stay put on the plywood. Okay, so what that has given me is a nice rectangle with square corners, and I've got the rectangle parallel to this line that I want here. So everything is going to be nice and straight when I get my servo installed there. So we now have our hole in the panel, and the servo will just go in from the back into it like so, and very little of it sticking out. And so just mark on the back, and I'll use tiny bolts to fasten it on there. Okay, now for these servos that go on the end. They're a little bit bigger ones. So these are the 17-gram metal servos. So what I'm going to do, I'm making just a little panel that fits right over that, because it's made for a full-size servo. The little panel goes over that. I'll have the hole that's the size of the servo. This will come in from underneath, and I'll have a little bit of a spacer such that it ends up with the servo being roughly even with the edge of that. I realize that it's extremely thin on each side of that, but we're not really depending on that for strength, because where it's getting supported is very close to where the support is underneath. And there'll be that spacer that goes between this and that. Oh, and you notice that I've set these up one on each end of this sheet. And the purpose of that is that I'm going to drill a hole into the middle part, and then I'll use the jigsaw to cut out the hole. And with it all being attached to the sheet while I'm doing that, that'll give me something to hold on to. Then after these holes are finished, then I'll cut them both out. And since I don't know precisely what the width of the saw is going to be between the two, I've got them set up on opposite ends of this little part of the sheet. And that way, whatever the saw cut width is won't make any difference. So we used our jigsaw to cut the hole. We cut it roughly to size, just a tiny bit undersized. I then used a metal file to flatten out the edges, and kept working at it until I could gradually, get the servo in from both ways. So anyway, then we've got it in as thus far. And what we need to do now is to work out how much of a spacer we need. So with it stuck in there all of the way, I'll just simply measure how far it's sticking out. And it looks like it's sticking out about 8 millimeters, 7.5 millimeters. Let's call it 7.5 millimeters that it's coming out there. So 7.5 millimeter spacer is what we'll need. We need to realize that on these edges, it is going to be, well, actually on those edges, it's not sitting on anything. So it's just on the end where it's got to fit over top of that. So we've got these bits on the end that come out about 9 millimeters. Okay, so the spacers are just simply going to be underneath the tabs on this, because we got to come out 9 millimeters to get to where the bit underneath is that sticks out. And it's about the same on both. This slightly under 9 millimeters, and this is slightly over 9 millimeters. So we'll just simply make very small tabs that go under that. That will allow that to be spaced out from the back to where the top is even. Well, let's get caught up to where we are now. We cut out the little plywood pieces, made 2 of these. It's cut out of plywood. What's that, about 2 mil, I guess. Little bits of balsa on the back that allows us to put the servo in from the back side there. We've drilled the holes through for the bolts. We've bolted it on with these larger bolts here, so that's gone right through the plywood, the balsa, and down to the servo, so it's very solid. We've then put 4 screws into the corners, and we've had a look where the other screw holes were, and we've picked that particular set of spots to miss the old holes. I've decided to have the arm longer, just so that there's less of an impact of this thing going up and down when it goes back and forth. We're using the little swivel sort of connector there for the control rod. I've got routed the servo wire through here. We used a piece of string and dropped a nut down through to get a hold of it there, and then we pulled the wire through, got it to this point, and then stuck it through the other side. We had this set at 1500, which is right about there, to get it in the middle. And then I just double checked with full travel to see what sort of travel that we've got, and it gets it just shy of the maximum for both. In setting this up, we generally like to be on the outermost part of it as much as possible, but the outermost hole on the arm out here was a bit wallowed out, and it had a sloppy fit, and the next one down has a tight fit. So I went second one down on both. But in general, if those can be longer, then any sort of slop that's there is going to have less of an effect on the actual position of the control surface. So we got all of that through. We'll do the other end, and then after we get the outermost ones done, then we'll move into the inner panels here, and we will we've already got the servo mounted, but we will work on these, getting them routed through and connecting up to a control arm over onto that surface. So that's where we're at the moment. Well, here's another update. We've got the servo for the dive brakes or flaps installed, and got my servo tester here. Okay, so that's them all the way up and all the way down. We could put a longer arm on there or hook it up shorter here and get more travel if we wanted, but certainly that's a good start to think about something like that. And then we'll do something similar for the middle and for the other side. Control rods are using on the flaps. Yeah, I'm just sort of running out of stuff in terms of rods and things like that, so I'm using whatever I've got. So anyway, I'm taking these threaded bits that you get with the long plastic control rods, and I'm just using a little short piece of the control rod to tie it together, so I'm not running it through a tube like what you normally would. And then I'm running them to where they're right together because I don't need it real long. So I'm cranking that up, and it gets sort of tight after a while. And to grab some pliers to grab a hold of the other bit. This little knurled thing, by the way, is a little tool that you buy for these that allows you to be able to thread these things easily. Well worthwhile. They don't cost much. That's going to do it. Yeah. And the way they've cut the threads on these things, it doesn't get tight. Oops. Very tight, so you can quite easily get it off. And then anytime you've got a control rod like this where you've got threads on both ends, usually you put a lock nut on one end, and I can't find a lock nut. So I'm going to use this tube as the lock nut, and I'm going to put a thread locker on it. So I've got one bit that's longer than the other, so the short bit I'm going to put into there, add some thread locker to it. And I realize that with this, if it was to rotate and move one way or the other, it's actually not going to change the length any, because if it rotates, whatever it goes on one, it's going to go into the other. and then it can only go one way as far as what the plastic will let it to go. So it's reasonably safe anyhow, but nonetheless, I'm going to put the thread locker in it, and then I'll just remember that I'm always adjusting it out on the control horn end. Okay. Cap back on there. So I got the thread locker on there. Run that in there. And I'll run it in all of the way. So it's snug, and that should be just fine. Okay, we're getting this servo set to go in the middle. It's narrower than the servo that used to be in there. Plus, there's an additional hole here in the middle. You got the 2 holes on each side, and then you got 1 hole in the middle right there, and you got 1 hole off center, off the middle over there. With the length of my arm on here, I want to have it all the way on that side of the hole to get that more or less straight. So I've marked where I want my holes to go. And I note that it's right on the edge of the plywood, and so then I have a look and I see, well, this thing has got lots of play up and down. And I also note that this hole here, the existing middle hole, is just right, the new hole that I want is kind of between those 2 holes that are already real close together. So that's not a real good situation. So what I'm planning on doing is putting another piece of plywood in there. And so I've taken this and I discovered that there is something going across right here. Okay, so I can't go in there very far. So I put this underneath, and then I marked around the hole where the hole came to. Okay, and the next thing I want to do is see how much of a gap I need to fill up there. So 2.5 millimeters on each side to take it all up. So I might do that. I like to have servos in tight to where even if the screws are having a hard time holding it, that the hole itself sort of gives it a little bit of strength. So 2.5 millimeters is what we want. So on this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, the hole comes to there with this thing pushed all the way up against that reinforcing bit. And I'm going to bring it about 2.5 millimeters out. So I'm going to bring it to there. And then what I'm going to do is, if it's a little bit too tight, I can take a file and I can clean it off a bit. So I'll do that one for up here. I'll go ahead and allow this thing to come around too. Why don't we let it hug that servo? The servo is 12.5. So we got a first little bit taken care of. We just put it in a vise and used a hobby saw to cut that off. That fits in there nicely. No slop. So the tricky bit is getting it in there, and I'm using 2 tools for this. Little pliers plus tweezers. Okay, so, okay, I'm holding it such that the opening is right on the edge over there. And I'm looking for my line that I drew as an outline to get that up on that edge. And I'll drip in some glue. Okay, just using the handle to press up on it just to make sure it's in the right places. The screws will go right into that, so the glue isn't the absolute to the end all to the thing. Okay, now we need to find another piece of plywood for the other bit. Okay, this also appears to have a cross member through there. So I'm just tracing where the hole comes to when it's up against that. And of course the reason why I need the pliers in there, if these had a bent end on it, then that would be okay, but I need something that can hold that thing flat up against this, and the pliers are just barely have enough on them to be able to do that. Now for this we need to be able to get it in as well. Barely does that at the moment, if at all. So I've got the area that I'm going to cut out cross-hatched so I'm not confused. The marks here are for the sides of the hole, and of course this you can see the original line on the outside here that I marked where the hole came to. I'm going just a smidge farther than that. Just realize that there's not a lot of room to get the servo positioned there, so I'm just going just a tiny bit beyond that. But we'll have the servo cradled in nicely in the little notch thing there. And this time I've got it to where we've got an equal amount on each side that's going to be glued around the hole. Well, we've got a beautiful tight fit now. That isn't going anywhere even without any screws. Really nice and snug. I'll fit a little piece of balsa into the gap there to just tidy it up a bit, but just a beautiful tight fit. So now we'll drill our holes, put the screws in, and that'll be a good solution. Well, now it's time to set up our flaps in terms of the adjustment for the controls. So what we've done here at the start is first off, when we put the servos in for the flaps, we used a servo tester to make sure they weren't going to go too far one way and too far the other way. So we got within an acceptable range there. Then, just to double check and to be very careful, what we've done is we've gone into our menu here, and we've gone down to the general menu, and we've gone, well, I guess first off, we're having to set this to a channel. So we got to go down to auxiliary channel, and it's channel 5, so we've got it highlighted there. We select that, and we want this dial up here, which is VRA, variable rate A. I'm going to stick it about in the middle, and then I'm going to select variable rate A. Okay, so now we got channel 5 set on variable rate A. Go back out of there. Now the next thing we want to do is see which way they're going. And so I see when I dial to the left it goes down slightly, and when I dial to the right it goes up slightly. And the reason for that slight movement, by the way, is I guess I've already done something else, and that is I've gone into endpoints. So I've gone here into endpoints, I've gone down to the second page, channel 5, and you can see I've got 10% and 10% set in there. I just want to make extra sure that, when we do something like this, it's not going to try and push that beyond where it's supposed to go. It shouldn't happen anyway because of how we set it up beforehand, but I'm just one that I like to be really careful. So we've set our endpoints that way. So now we see that it's going up when I turn to the right and it's going down when I go to the left, and that's not the way I want to go. I want it to have it no flaps when it's all the way to the left and full flaps when it's all the way to the right. So I'm going to put this back here in the middle, and I'm going to go to reverse, and I go to channel 5 on reverse, and I just press the button in, and that's reversed it. And so now when I dial to the right it goes down, dial to the left it goes up. Okay, having done that, we then exit out of that, and now we want to go back to endpoints, because we've got it to where it's going the right direction. We're in a nice safe position right now, and so go to endpoints. And the first thing I'm going to do is go all the way closed on the dial,
and I want the flap to be all the way closed. So I go down to channel 5, second page of our menu, it says high and low. I think the left-hand one is going to be the left, but let's just double check. Oops, I got to get onto that one. Press in. That selected it, and let's just see whether when I dial this, if it changes it. Yes, that's going up. So I was right about that. So what I want is I want these flaps to be pretty well even with the wing when they're all the way up. I still have a tiny bit of extra travel in there that I could go to, but I want them even with the wing, and here at the root of the wing, that's the best place to determine that. So that's at 89%. I now go to the other end, and so now I'll dial in full flaps, and at this end I would like to be at about that 89% just to keep everything even. So we'll see how we go. So I'm going to go over to this 10% on the low setting, and I've pushed that in, and now I'm dialing it across, and I'm looking for where we're going, making sure that it's got travel, and it looks to me like I'll be able to go to that full 89%. Oops, that's a little bit beyond. 88, 89. Okay, and to me that looks really good. That's a lot of flaps. So I'll be comfortable with that. By having it 89 and 89, it means that when I do the dial in the middle, I'm going to be half flaps and nothing and full flaps. Now, oftentimes when you're setting up flaps, you would also want to adjust the speed at which they travel. So you've got, where do we got it? Monitor channel speed. Oops. Get down to that one, channel speed. So I could go into there and go down to channel 5, and it says the number of seconds. But in this particular case, since I'm using a dial, I can actually control the speed as to how fast I turn that dial. And so I'm going to stick with that. And that will give me a good way to sort of feel how things are happening as they're happening without any delay. So, that being the case, we are all set up as far as flaps are concerned. And the next thing to get into will be to set the dive brake that's down underneath in the middle. And what I've done now is I've got, we're working on our servo for the dive flaps up here, and it's not connected to the thing. I wanted to make sure it was in the center. I could have done that with the servo tester, and actually I would have done that with the servo tester along the way. But we want to make sure that we got that thing set up properly. So let's have a look at what we need to do. Okay, what we're going to do now is we go to our menu, so we press the menu button there. And we want to make sure we got the channels set up right. So go to this general menu, press in. Then we've got auxiliary channel down at the bottom of that first page of the list. And we got channel 6, and I've already assigned it to VRB, but if I hadn't done that, I press in this. I then go down and I select VRB. So these are the variable rate dials, and it says VRB. It says VRB next to that one there. So you got the variable rate dials. So we've selected the VRB. We press it in, and so now that's assigned to that channel. As I'm doing all of this, keep in mind that I've got the servo disconnected, so the arm can go anywhere safely, and it's not going to do any damage. Quite critical on this dive flap in that it's got a really hard stop at one end, and it would bust the servo if it tried to go past that point. Okay, so we then use our back button, and so then we want to go to the endpoints, and again I'm a step ahead of you here, but we go down to channel 6, so it's on the second page, and you can see I got channel 6, 10% and 10%. So what I'm wanting to do is to limit the travel of that channel such that I'm not going to do any damage. Okay.
Having set up the receiver and having the rate very limited, the endpoints limited to that 10%, having the servo with the control arm disconnected, I'm then going to plug this into channel 6. And I've got it such that I can get a hold of it here from underneath. It's pretty hard to plug any of this stuff in due to the limited length of the cables to get it from the top. So it's easier to just pull out the receiver and put them in from the bottom. Okay, and we just make sure everything is in there nice and snug anytime you're doing that type of thing. Okay. So we now get our transmitter, and we've got a very small movement on the control arm. Okay. The next thing I'm doing is I'm going to make sure my dial is turned down all the way to the where I'd have the flaps closed, in that closed position. I'm going to then go to the endpoints. I'm actually not going to use that out on that end there. When I was doing it before, it doesn't need an awful lot of movement to get that dive flap down. So I'm going to go to a smaller point there. So let's go back to our endpoints. We go menu, down to the general menu, endpoints. Okay, channel 6. And at the bottom one, I'm going to get that on the bottom one. I press it in. I'm going to dial that up. Get this out of the way. Dial that up. Let's see if it was all the way. It would be about there. Let's give it 90% to give us something to work with. Okay. So the critical thing here is that when we put on our control arm, we want to make sure it doesn't try to push this flap beyond the closed position. That's going to be very tricky there. So whatever we pick in terms of the end point, we want a little bit on each side of it, because we're going to set this thing up such that the control isn't quite all of the way, and then we're going to use a transmitter to just push it that little bit extra to get it into that closed position. Just looking at this thing, we got this huge amount of travel here, rather small amount of travel there. Takes very little to get that, so we're going to reduce this thing down into one of those smaller holes. Having gotten the control horn in the right hole, we then adjusted the endpoints to have that dive flap fully shut when it was supposed to be shut, and open roughly equivalent to what the regular flaps are opening to when it was all the way open. We then went through all of the other controls, making sure that things were going in the right direction. We set up conditions on the transmitter, which is like rate settings for different modes, and made sure everything was sorted that way with expos in place for each. And with that, all of the radio setup was done. Following that, we did do some testing with the motor and props, checking the amps. There is a separate video on that if you want to see how we went through that, and got the plane all ready to fly. Well, we got the job done, and here's the completed plane. It came up pretty well. I was quite pleased with the color matching on the tail that my daughter helped me with. We managed to get those colors reasonably close. Of course, all of the structure and the wing came together nicely. Got our flaps converted from dive flaps to just ordinary flaps. Finish came up pretty good. So all in all, we've been very pleased with the repair work on this particular project. Well, I trust that you found it helpful walking through it with us and seeing what we went through. Perhaps it'll be a help to you as you work through your own projects along the way. So this is RC Jim signing off. Do make sure that you subscribe to our channel if you haven't done so already. Keep everything at hand, and just enjoy your flying. So have a great day and happy flying.